You're listening
This
to
is
America's
Daryl
Web
inviting
Radio.
you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino with Do Facts Matter, and I have my guest, my son Joseph D'Agostino, and we're going to talk a little bit about academia to begin the show. But before that, let's set the stage. Many years ago, when I was actually in high school, I used to go down to Greenwich Village in New York, and there was a lot of political debating going on, and there's the old communists and the new communists. The new left was just coming into fashion, and the old left actually you could debate with them, and the new left just wanted to shut you up. But in any case, one of the groups that I used to go to once in a while was a Maoist group, and they were really hoping for a Maoist revolution in the United States. They thought Mao Zedong was just the greatest person on the face of the earth. And they would speculate when that Maoist revolution would come. Well, if that group got together today, and they'd all be pretty old because I'm pretty old, they would say, we're there. The Cultural Revolution has begun. The Maoist Cultural Revolution has begun in this country. There's no question about it. It tracks the Cultural Revolution in China. Packs of young, some thugs, some genuine revolutionaries, whatever, roaming around, censoring, beating up, rioting people that I don't agree with, particularly professors in those days. Actually, the professors really got the worst of it in a lot of the universities. And that brings us up to right now, because what is going on in the universities? And I will say, and we'll go over this a little bit later, that almost every university in this country, or every college, has adopted the American Association of University Professors Statement on Academic Freedom. Many schools have adopted Chicago's Statement on Freedom of Speech, and that includes John Marshall Law School here in Atlanta. Despite all that, are professors being allowed to speak? Are scholars being allowed to publish their findings if they disagree with the current PC orthodoxy? Joseph, what do you think?
Unfortunately, I can barely hear you, so I really have no idea what you said other than something about a Maoist revolution.
Well, I'm asking what's going on, if you can hear me now, what's going on college campuses with professors who dissent from the current political correct orthodoxy?
Right, so now there's a coordinated campaign to purge law professors and college professors and others from universities and law schools around the country. So obviously this has been going on for decades. There are fewer conservatives in academia teaching as professors than there were 25 years ago. So there weren't that many 25 years ago, and over the past 25 years they've gradually been squeezed out, forced to resign, quit in disgust, or maybe just ended up getting retired and then not replaced by another conservative. Now what we're seeing with the beginning of the Maoist cultural revolution going on in the country now in earnest, people are being purged from all sorts of positions of influence in society: government, media, sports, entertainment, and this includes moderate liberals who don't sign on to the more radical agenda. Just like with all revolutions, they purge their moderates periodically, become more radical, and then radicalize it further, and then purge the new, so-called moderates who were radical before but now have become moderate. And so just in the past week, there's been a big increase in activity where, according to Jeffrey Miller and other people who are in academia, just in the past week, the dozens of campaigns across the country have been launched against conservative professors to get them to resign or be fired during this summer purging, where the media revolution is going on within the editorial departments and news departments of everywhere from the New York Times to the Intercept to the Washington Post to just about so many of these different local places. So this is now going on across the country, where there seems to it must be coordinated campaign to purge a lot of conservative professors, the remaining conservative professors, from institutions that you probably never heard of, small colleges in various parts of the country, all the way to places like Cornell Law School.
Yes, in fact, let me, and of course there is a group that's fighting this called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, FIRE, and they have an interesting website where they list the 10 colleges or universities where free speech is under attack in the highest levels. And Harvard is one of them, by the way. Harvard is rated right up there as a campus which is hostile towards free speech and free assembly. Let me read you the Chicago Statement, and at least excerpts from the Chicago Statement. Again, this was adopted by the Atlanta's John Marshall Law School. And this is, I'm quoting, "Because the university is committed to free and open inquiry in all matters, it guarantees all members of the university community the broadest possible latitude to speak, write, listen, challenge, and learn. It is not the proper role of the university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive." Well, that's been adopted by a number of schools, obviously not all the schools. And in the face of that, is that prevailing today? Are those kind of sentiments on the uptick anywhere? What do you think, Joe?
Unfortunately, I couldn't hear what you said.
No, I was just reading I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with our sound thing here, but I was just reading the excerpts from the Chicago Statement. Are you familiar with the Chicago? You're a University of Chicago graduate, so perhaps you're familiar with the Chicago Statement on free speech?
Yes, the one that came out a few years ago.
Yes,
it's one of the better statements out there.
That's right. Well, are other universities stampeding to adopt this?
I'm afraid I don't think that's happened. Very much in most places, not everywhere, but in the vast majority of places, the opposite has been occurring and continues to occur now, where free speech is reinterpreted to not include speech that challenges any of the narratives being promoted by the rich and powerful, being promoted by Wall Street banks, big corporations, the deep state, other cultural elites, through activists and institutions that they control, they finance, or that they control through other means. So what's going on, of course, like all revolutions, this is a revolution promoted by the rich and powerful, or by at least a large segment of the rich and powerful. No revolutions come from below. That's a myth. And this one obviously isn't. It's very clearly being promoted by very powerful people in very senior positions. And free speech is being understood to not include hate speech. And of course, hate speech is anything that dissents from the narrative. And we're getting actually just very, very mild criticisms or even questions about Black Lives Matter or the idea of systemic racism or transgenderism or anything else that they're choosing to promote right now are being met with people actually being fired. For actually making very mild criticisms. That has become hate speech, right? Very mild, very even, like I said, questioning. And they're actually, this is just part of it, they're going to transition soon. You can see they've already started this. Silence is violence, right? So very soon, not explicitly endorsing what their agenda, not explicitly repeating their talking points and their ideological fervor, will be grounds for termination of your employment and you'll never be hired again. Can be grounds for excluding people from the internet, censoring them off of social media. VDARE has got notice this week. Even its website is going to come down. So even websites are going to come down, not just social media. I expect in a year or two there will be no conservatives left on the internet at all, other than establishment-approved ones that don't really do anything, like the Cato Institute or Heritage Foundation or something. So silence is violence. Soon we will be required, in order to have a career, to talk on the internet, to join certain clubs, even to have a bank account, because they have been excluding conservatives from bank accounts increasingly, have credit cards, etc., otherwise function in society. You will be required to explicitly endorse these things yourself. Silence will not be enough, because silence is violence.
Well, I think that's going in that direction. I agree with you. Did you read about that one reporter, his last name was Fang, who's a leftist, writes for The Nation magazine, among other places, and he was sharply criticized and forced to apologize for what he said? No, for what someone said he was interviewing. He was interviewing one of the protesters, a young black man who was recounting his criticism of the rioters and recounting the fact that two of his cousins were murdered in his neighborhood, and bemoaning that fact, and the reporter was pilloried, attacked for daring to interview this guy.
Right. This Lee Fang, who's been around for a while, is a very progressive left-wing reporter for The Intercept. He interviewed this young black man. This young black man gave some criticisms of Black Lives Matter and that whole way of thinking, and Fang didn't even endorse those views. He just included them in a video that he posted online, and was faced with denunciations, Maoist-style denunciations from his colleagues at The Intercept. He was forced to apologize. Wouldn't be surprised if he leaves The Intercept soon. None of his colleagues or former colleagues would defend him publicly. So that's part of it. But you see how the power and the strength of this is that so few people speak out, right? His colleagues and former colleagues would not speak out publicly to defend him. He was being denounced by other people, saying he made them, feel unsafe and all that. And of course, again, you see that the source of the criticisms also doesn't matter. It's a young black man criticizing Black Lives Matter. It doesn't matter, right? They're taking Aunt Jemima off the syrup, right? Her descendants are complaining. They say this is, a memory of our family. This is a positive portrayal of black people. They don't like it. No one cares, right?
Well, wait a minute. Aunt Jemima was a model who was paid very, very well for speaking in favor of the syrup and being a representative of the company, wasn't she?
She was paid to go around. I don't know how much she was paid, but yes, she was paid to go around. This was 100 years ago. People complain it was sort of a stereotypical minstrel-style portrayal, that sort of thing. Something that I think approximately nobody knew about until a couple of weeks ago. And all these other things are going on. For example, the man who invented the gator bait cheer, right, for the University of Florida, I think. He's a black man. He used to play, and he invented the cheer, and now they're getting rid of it because it's supposedly racist, but I can't figure out how. And he's complaining publicly that, why are you taking away this cheer that I invented? He's a black man, but they don't care, right? They don't care about what ordinary black people think, or what any black or any other person thinks who disagrees with their narrative. Right?
Okay, we're up against
and
the hard
most
break.
Of the time,
Wait.
Of course, the people who are making these decisions are white liberals.
Oh, hold on, Joe. We're up against a break, and I want to consider, why is this movement, Black Lives Matter, in the most radical form, being funded by the major corporations who are really indirectly funding the riots? We'll be right back.
Want to give your family?
Joe, you're on a speakerphone, correct?
Then go online and check.
Yeah, it's louder when I'm on speakerphone. So when I turn it off, I can hear even less.
Okay, well, you sound like you're in a cave, but that's fine. No problem.
What?
Nothing, you're okay.
You'll love it, and you'll love having one in your shop.
If your health insurance premium is more than your mortgage, Ellen Deal with Ideal Solutions is here to help. Whether you're a small business owner, individual, family, or baby boomer, email MAGA45CAG@gmail.com and I'll respond with 3 easy questions to help you determine if you can get away from Obamacare. As a 20-year veteran of the insurance industry, I'm here to help with all your insurance needs. Email Ellen Deal at MAGA45CAG@gmail.com.
This is Daryl Pullis inviting you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Do Facts Matter. And I have my son Joseph D'Agostino on the phone, who, by the way, is a graduate of the University of Chicago. And we had just read excerpts from the University of Chicago statement on free speech. And as professors, we both were subject to the American Statement of Principles on academic freedom from AAUP, American Association of University Professors, which presumably protects professors in their ideas, views, and discussions, as long as they're appropriate to the class they're teaching. And that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. You run afoul of the PC crowd. Getting back to my question, but before I do, there's a wonderful little phrase called, I think it's called Zerk Rush. Joe, are you there?
I'm here. I can't understand what you're saying, unfortunately.
Well, I was talking about a phrase called Zerk Rush. You know, when pygmies, when intellectual pygmies or weak entities attack a strong entity, they swarm. They swarm. And so that's what we're getting. We're getting the college faculty pygmies attacking the scholars, the real scholars who really do the heavy-duty work of real research. And I think we're seeing that.
I very much disagree, okay? The left portrays itself as these powerless victims who are trying to defend themselves, but the opposite is true. They control the administrations of almost all the universities in this country. They control the professional associations. They edit the premier scholarly publications. They control the academic book publishers, just as they control the normal book publishers, and they control Hollywood, and they control most of the corporations and 80% of the media. So the people swarming, although they usually are very much of an inferior type, these sort of people, they very often are mentally ill or otherwise deranged, and it's very obvious. They're actually being directed and controlled by very powerful people who are in charge. So I think it's very deceptive to look at it as sort of a bunch of weak people attacking strong people. I think it is the very strongest people using weak people to attack some strong people to eliminate those strong people, right? But it is, of course, the strongest people who make the decisions. These pygmies cannot fire the professors, the millennial staffers of the New York Times did not get the editorial page editor fired. He was fired by the editor-in-chief of the New York Times. Those are the ones who are making decisions. Those are the ones who are doing the purges, not the weak people. The weak people don't have the power to do that.
Well, I meant intellectually inferior folks who are attacking the serious-minded professors, and of course they're backed by the establishment. Let's get back to the question I asked. Why are the major corporations funding this, like PepsiCo and Nike? They're funding the riots, essentially. Why are they doing that?
Because it's in their interest. It's in their interest in two senses. First of all, just like with the virus panic response, a lot of this is destroying small business. It's destroying people who aren't part of the sort of the corporatist agenda, thus enabling big corporations to have even more money and power, right? So any kind of independent thought, any kind of independent person who's like financially independent, independently wealthy, or have their own small business, decreases or counterbalances the power of giant corporations, who of course are almost all of them are in league with big government. It's all one big club, right? And they want to control more and more. And they want to get more and more money. So this is sort of part of the agenda of controlling everything from Washington, D.C. and New York City. It's also a cheap way for them to virtue signal, changing the box of Aunt Jemima or the bottles of Aunt Jemima is a cheap way to pretend to care about black people. In the meantime, real inner city black people continue to suffer just as much because changing that image is not going to help them, so on and so forth. But there's a deeper agenda here, and this is what a lot of conservatives have trouble understanding. And this is one reason why conservatives fail, because they don't understand the world well. They have a materialist conception. They do not have a spiritual conception of the world. They accept what people in power say at face value, even though conservatives also know they're fraudulent liars, but still continue to believe what they say, whether it's Donald Trump or a corporate executive or Anthony Fauci. These people are all frauds and liars. The conservatives continue to believe what they say. The real agenda of these people, and that includes the people who control the corporations, is to destroy Western civilization, what's left of Christendom, and create a new society, a new communist or Maoist or totalitarian Orwellian society, whatever you like to call it, in which they have total control over everything, right? That is their goal. That's what these people are after. They want to destroy all opposition, have total control over everything, and impose their idea of society, their idea of the way men and women should be, and they're the ones who are going to control it, like all left-wing societies in the history of the world. All truly left-wing societies, there's a tiny elite at the top, and everyone else is a slave, and that's what they want.
Well, it would seem that they're well on the way to at least creating United States as a third world country. A ruling elite ruling over a bunch of peasants who are completely dependent on the largesse of the government. But I don't see necessarily how that translates into great wealth. I guess it does translate into great wealth for a few, the top 1,000, the top 400, whatever you want to call it.
So 2 points on that. First of all, people need to understand, and conservatives in particular have a problem with this, because conservatives like money more than power, okay? Conservatives like money more than they like power. Leftists prefer power to money. It's more important for them to have power to money than have money. Leftists are happy to sacrifice wealth, including their own wealth, if it means they will get more power, okay? So that's the first thing. These people are after destruction. They're after destruction more than anything else, because they hate everyone, including themselves, right? You can just think about Hillary Clinton, for example. So they hate everyone, including themselves. So they really want destruction, and they want the power in order to destroy. But these sorts of people, people like Stalin, Lenin, Mao, right? These Pol Pot, these people are not motivated primarily by money. These people are motivated by something else, things like power. So they're perfectly willing to trade the wealth for power. The second thing is, the huge amounts of wealth that these people have is actually notional, right? It's just money, it's just numbers in a computer. Jeff Bezos is worth $100 billion. What does that really translate into? I mean, he can't, there's no way all these different billionaires could cash out their billions and spend it on something, right? The money is sort of fictional. The money, the numbers in the computer, really what they do is they represent control. Money is a form of power, in fact, right? That's all money is actually a form of power. And so, let's put it this way. If Jeff Bezos, assuming he's as power hungry as most of them, which he seems to be, he owns the Washington Post as well as the founder of Amazon. Let's say if he could have $100 billion, but that's only 5% of a country's wealth, he'd rather have $1 billion, right, which is only 1% of $100 billion, right? He'd prefer to lose 99% of his wealth if his share of the wealth of the country goes from 5% to 10%, right? Because that would give him more power. He may lose more wealth in an objective sense, but his power has increased. And since, of course, there really is no difference between having $1 billion and $100 billion as a practical matter, except for the power that it gives you, he actually doesn't even lose 99% of his wealth anymore, not in a real sense.
Well, I think you make a very good point there, and I look at California for an example of a state that is being divided between what is effectively a peasantry and the affluent, with the middle class being squeezed out constantly, inviting out of the state. It's just quite amazing. But of course, there was an interesting little article by Victor David Hanson, Professor Victor David Hanson, who talked about how these left-wing mobs, these left-wing movements end up devouring their own. As you said in the beginning, you're never radical enough. And as soon as you're...
Right, they devour you if you don't keep up with the new fashions that sometimes become more radical with each passing week or sometimes each passing day, right? If you don't keep up, if you say, these are my principles, I want to stick to them, you're going to get your head chopped off, just like during the French Revolution. Right? All these revolutions do this, right? They start out, sometimes they even start out with relatively reasonable demands. Then over time, they become more and more radical because that is the driving force, and that's what the people at the very top really want. And just as the French Revolution killed, all kinds of its stars, Danton, Saint-Just, etc., eventually Robespierre even, right? Because they weren't sufficiently radical. And of course, sometimes it's just due to personal rivalries and things like that. This revolution is doing the same thing. Many moderate liberals or even progressives that were perfectly acceptable, and their views are perfectly acceptable just a few months ago, have now been purged for not keeping up with the increasingly radical demands of Antifa and Black Lives Matter and other people associated with those movements and organizations. So yes, what you're going to see is liberals and leftists become more and more radical in order to save their careers and save their financial lives and save their social lives and not be censored from the internet, and etc. In order to keep up with the vanguard, they're going to become more and more radical. And of course, if they don't, they'll simply be purged, like conservatives are being purged.
Well, of course, going back to the campuses, John Marshall Law School will resume in the middle of August. We have adopted the Chicago Statement. We do have a interesting faculty in that it's more varied in terms of the ideas and philosophy than most law schools. I can remember the time when I was the head of law deans and professors for Ronald Reagan in 1980, and I was told to find me a Reagan supporter at every law school. And let me tell you, I couldn't do it. I still remember the conversation I had with Professor DeVito, who was a professor of mine when I went to law school at Emory, and he had left Emory and to go to Golden Gate. He was at Emory. He was considered, way left. I took a civil rights seminar with him, and my view of him was, and I used to tell him that he's a knee-jerk liberal. And anyway, he and I got friendly, and he went to Golden Gate. So I called him up, and I said, "Look, I'm head of law deans and professors for Reagan. I know you're not a conservative, but I need a name of a conservative faculty member at Golden Gate Law School." He said to me, No, I am the conservative. I said, "What?" He said, "Yes, they all consider me a conservative because I'm a McGovern liberal, and that makes me a conservative on this faculty." And I think, as you point out, after things getting a little better for a while, they've gotten worse. Now go back to our law school. I can identify at our law school probably 3 other professors who are conservative, and maybe a 4th one who actually votes Republican, kind of a rhino, and votes Republican on on defense issues, particularly defense of Israel issues. But the rest of the faculty is certainly not conservative, and the question is, we now have a dean that's also on the left, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens at John Marshall, because our student body is 35 to 40% minority, and most of that minority are African Americans. And historically, John Marshall's been pretty mellow politically, pretty tolerant, pretty mellow. We've had
well, one simple approach that they use and that they've been using, although they're now accelerating things, is simply when conservative professors retire, they don't get replaced. And there are very few junior tenure track professors around the country who are now conservative, except at the very few schools that are very aggressively conservative themselves. There's a handful of libertarians, but almost no conservative Christians.
Well, that's right. That's quite true. I remember there was a dispute at Harvard about that when they were talking about making a more diversified faculty, and one of the professors, well-known professors, said, well, we need to hire an evangelical Christian, get that point of view. Well, that didn't meet any particular positive response. Or as the member of the faculty said, well, your guys' idea of the diversity is everybody looks different but thinks the same. And that's quite true, unfortunately. Can the professors withstand this onslaught? I mean, there was one professor fired recently who posted a joke. And it was an innocuous joke about bombing 52 cultural sites in the United States, like the Kardashian residence and some mall and things of that sort. I mean, it was a joke. And, I was violent, and he was fired.
Well, the Catholic chaplain at MIT was just fired for suggesting that there was no proof that George Floyd was killed out of racist motives.
Well, I think that's true. I'll address that too, because I had an interesting reaction to that when I first saw it. We're up against the break. We'll be right back.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Live closer to your food source. Learn how to grow it yourself. Please join me every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern on America's Homegrown Veggie Show for tips and advice from the country's best gardeners.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Do Facts Matter. And we're talking with my son, Joseph D'Agostino, who actually was a professor at the Savannah Law School while that was in existence. And I'm still a professor, of course, at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School, at least for now. I don't know. I'm conservative. May decide to try and purge me. Oh, well, I'm tenured and I'm old, and they figure they make it, wait me out. How many more years could I go, right? Anyway, getting back to this Floyd thing, when I first saw that tape, and I agree with that priest or chaplain who got fired, I don't know that there was a particular racial factor in that, because what happened, if you watch the tape, and this is what my reaction was, the policeman, Chauvin, he moved his knee to double down, and my reaction to that was, this is malice. This was sheer malice. And that's why I think they raised the charge to second-degree murder, because they looked at that tape carefully and they decided that he wanted to double down on this guy. I think what happened in Georgia, at Brunswick, jogging while black, there definitely was a racial factor involved in that, for sure. But I think there's some personal malice, and of course later came out that they knew each other, they had worked at the same place. But that was very interesting, because I noticed the movement of that knee and by the policeman, which indicated to me he was doubling down on what he was doing, even though it was obvious the guy was subdued at the time. So I found that kind of interesting. But obviously the Aubrey thing in Brunswick does have a racial connotations. I doubt very much if he were white he would have been stopped. I'm not saying that it's not a more complex issue than just that, but definitely a part of a racial issue there. Well, what do we do? Is there anything that we do? Is there anything that we in the future? I mean, Victor David Hanson said the left will start devouring itself. How fast? And what's going to happen? We got 140 days, and you and I don't agree about Trump. I think Trump is genuinely trying to rescue this country from the left, rescue this country from control by the ultra rich, because they hate him. I mean, they hate him for a reason, and they oppose him for a reason. So I think sometimes you're known by your enemies, and he certainly has them. But in any case, what can we do? What's going to happen? Is this stoppable in the near future? Is this stoppable in the long-term future? Of course, prophecies are always dangerous. But what about from now until the election? Are we going to have an election where the radical left takes over everything and goes merrily on their way, purging professors, academics who don't agree with them or who do research that doesn't find the answer that they want, which is what's happened to a number of professors? They do research and they get a different answer. What's that one professor who got an answer about transsexuals being unhappy? The further they are from the time they either had a sex change operation or had hormonal treatments, they most of them eventually regret it. They think they made a mistake. A lot of them think they could go back, they'd go back. But if they had the sex change operation, it makes it difficult. Although there was one person on the internet who said he had a sex change operation and he went back. He had another sex change operation. He regretted he couldn't have children, but he made a big mistake going from male to female. So what does the short-term future hold? Let's just talk about the short term, because no one knows what the long-term future holds, I don't think. Joe, short-term future?
Well, I think the short-term future is very negative. I see no reason why they're not going to continue to purge people and become more and more radical and do more and more extreme things, and to see the violence gradually escalate, the disorder gradually escalate. Obviously, we have a bad economy now. They're not letting go of the virus hoax, so they're going to, keep interrupting business and travel and education and so on to break down society so they can then rebuild it in their own image, as the free Masonic motto, right? Dissolve and rebuild. I think it is very negative because they control all the major institutions, right? They control 80% of the media. They control Hollywood. They control most of the churches. They control this, that, and the other thing, right? The deep state, obviously, Wall Street. So I think it is very negative. I assume Trump will continue to do what he's done so far, which is nothing except talk and throw temper tantrums on Twitter and so on. So I think he's completely useless. So I think we have to keep in mind that the short term is going to be negative. And also keep in mind, we're sort of focusing on a small slice. Academia is a very small slice. People are being purged all over the country from ordinary jobs for expressing wrong opinions about Black Lives Matter and Antifa and so on. I got this thing I just saw here about a lesbian artist, a famous lesbian artist, who has been fired because she was following the wrong people on Twitter. She was following Mike Cernovich, Jack Posobiec, and InfoWars on Twitter. She's been fired for that. She didn't even say anything. She was following the wrong people on Twitter. So this is happening all over the country, people being purged, particularly from any jobs that have cultural influence, right? So this is going to continue to get worse, continue to get radical. The left will not eat itself, or if you can say it can eat itself, it will just get stronger by dining on itself and get more radical, because it is like all revolutions, whether the one in Russia, the one in France, the one everywhere else, it is supported at the very highest levels by the very richest and most powerful people in the land. Long term, the only solution is separation. The only solution is to get away from these people. These people are dedicated to evil. They're dedicated to destruction. There's no reasoning with them. There is no reasonable compromise that can be made. They will not be satisfied until there is a Maoist cultural revolution in which millions of people die, millions more, tens of millions more from concentration camps. Everything is destroyed, particularly Christianity.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's pretty obvious. They're out to destroy Christianity. This country has become, at the highest levels, anti-Christian, not post-Christian. But let's go back to a point you made about the left's control of all these institutions. How does that jibe with the concept of systemic racism? Does that mean that all our lefties who control the universities, control Hollywood, control Wall Street, all these big lefties who are financing, in a sense, financing the rioting, this is systemic racism? How is that systemic racism?
Well, that is part of the proof of the falsity and bad faith of this movement and of these riots and so on. The people who are in charge are the very people who are virtue signaling about this, and the very people responsible for the supposed systemic racism. Right? In Minneapolis, it's had a Democratic mayor for decades. The governor of Minnesota is a Democrat. The Democratic Party has dominated the state of Minnesota for decades, just as it's dominated the politics of most large cities. And yet you never hear about how the liberal Democrats are responsible for the systemic racism that's supposedly killing black people, to the police, and Joe Biden, who just got the nomination for president for the Democrats, or is about to. He was, law and order in favor of locking people up, putting them in prison, so on and so forth. And so the obvious falsity here is that the people in charge are the people who are not being blamed for the supposed policies and systemic racism that's so supposedly damaging, right? And that also shows you who's really controlling, all of this. So the systemic racism is this sort of vague demonic force or witchcraft out there. You see how people don't really change, right? So in the past, people will blame demons or witches for bad things happening, right? Now they'll blame white privilege. They'll blame systemic racism, and so on and so forth. But they don't blame specific people who are actually in charge if those people are a member of the political party that they like, right? In the case of the policing of cities with large black populations, that person is and has been, at least for decades, if not longer, a Democrat, right? So, like I say, the only eventual solution, long-term solution, is separation, getting away from these people, breaking America up into separate countries, something like that.
Well, that was predicted some years ago. I read an article, maybe 20, 25 years ago, that I read this article about the coming separation of America into 4 or 5 different countries. I'll tell you what I remember of that article right after the break.
Obamacare is failing, but in order to get back on the right track with health policy, people need to be informed. ObamacareWatch.org is your resource to understand what's happening with this law and what you can do to stay active, stay informed, and make positive change happen. ObamacareWatch.org. Visit us now.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Hal Scherz, as we talk about the topics that doctors talk about amongst themselves, such as Medicare, Obamacare, alternative forms of care, and health information technology. Join us every Thursday morning, 8 to 9 a.m.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the americasbroadcastnetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Do Facts Matter, and I'm with my son Joseph D'Agostino. Both of us, I'm still an academic, and Joseph recently was an academic at the Savannah Law School, which is now closed, and we're talking about what's going on in near future, what's going to go on, solutions. And some years ago, I read this article. Maybe 25 years ago. It was quite some time ago. I think it was even before Reagan became president, so maybe 40 years ago, about the United States splitting into 4 or 5 different countries. And this author talked about the different interests of the empty quarter including places like Idaho and sparsely populated western states, Montana, and talked about the traditional South, which nowadays is not so traditional because you've got so many people who have come south from other areas, and so the old traditional Christian South is no longer there. And in some ways, of course, it's a plus, not the weakening of Christianity, but the weakening of racial animosity. I talk to my students, some of my students, and I have over the years, I've had a lot of black students, African American students, and many of them have come down from the north. And I say, where are you from? Oh, my family was from Chicago, my family was Detroit, my family was New York, New Jersey, whatever it was. And I said, why'd they come down here? Oh, the opportunity. They came down here, opportunities. And I say, how do you vote down here? Oh, we're Democrats. I said, so you fled a bunch of Democrat-controlled areas to come down here and you vote Democrat, so you want the opportunities down here to be just as bad as they were in Detroit as you elect the same types of people to political office. And they haven't thought about that. And they really haven't thought about that, which is really amazing, because I find that a lot of my students, especially the African Americans or black students, many of them have strong Christian values, yet they don't connect the Democrat Party with the anti-Christian sentiments in this country. But maybe someday they will, and maybe they'll save Trump. Now, you and I disagree about Trump. I think Trump has done a good job under the circumstances, and I think he's really trying to keep things together. I must say he's not getting any help recently from the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is determined to continue their legislative role in society, and someday maybe we'll have a majority of judges who think they ought to be judges and not legislators. But that may be too much to ask for. Anyway, I don't see the divisions that were fairly sharp when I read this article 40 years ago. The coastal empire and New England and the traditional South and the empty quarter. Things are a little bit more mixed up. Look at Arizona. People flee California and they go to Arizona, and now are turning Arizona into California with their voting. The left has pretty much taken over Colorado, and many of the multimillionaires, billionaires, Democrats have really put a lot of money into taking over Colorado, and now they're doing it in Arizona. If the election were held today, the Republicans would lose the Colorado Senate seat and the Arizona Senate seat. We'd lose both of them, and we'd lose both of them by big margins. So I don't see that happening the way, at least it was envisioned by this author many years ago. How do you see if the country decided to break up? How does it break up? How does it break up?
So yes, it is long past possible to divide the country up neatly geographically. So what would have to happen would have to be something like the partitioning of India and so on, where there's going to be massive population transfer. I'm not advocating breaking up the country or massive population transfer. I'm just saying if this were to happen, and needless to say events are far beyond my control, this is what would have to happen. You would have to have segments of the country designated for Christians. This is for serious Christians. Bible-believing Christians, they're going to live here. And anyone who wanted to live there would have to move. And anyone who didn't want to live there would have to move out, right? This is going to be the socialist states of America over here. And anyone who wanted that would move. Anyone who didn't like it there would have to move to Christian America or something like that. Maybe black nationalists want their own part of the country. I'm not really sure, what they want, right? Maybe part of the country would go back to Mexico in the Southwest, right? But the fact is, we have a very large faction in this country that is absolutely determined to have a totalitarian, Orwellian, communist state. And they will not stop until they get it. And the only solution is to get away from it. Moving overseas is a possibility. The other possibility is to separate somehow. People can move to different parts of the country that are more conservative, less hostile, and all that. But the long run, it will take a political separation. Of course, there can be an alternative to somehow take over the government and suppress these communists. But I think we've seen the conservative movement be a total 100% failure. We have seen the demographic changes that are going to give Democrats a lot on the electoral votes for the next few years. In the next few years, maybe as soon as this year. And the Democrats will use power to make sure that their rule is permanent. Then the communists can take over that way. That's just the future we're facing. So separation, really, just like in your personal life, there's some people you just have to stay away from. There's some people who just don't like you, right? And usually the best solution to people who just don't like you or hate you is just not to have anything to do with them, right? Not spend any time around them, not talk to them, etc. And that politically is what is going to need to happen so that Christians can continue to practice their faith, so that conservatives can have free speech and have careers, even have bank accounts, so on and so forth. Because these people, just as in so many countries before, whether it's Russia, China, Vietnam, Cuba, France back in the day, England in the 17th century, the English Civil War, Nazi Germany, right? They're all the same. They're not going to stop until they totally crush all opposition and force everyone to conform. And if you don't want to conform, you're going to have to fight for your space or fight to take over America away from those people. But I think the latter fight is much more difficult to win.
Well, I mean, that's a pessimistic view of the future, but of course, that's not just your view. We saw books like 1984, Brave New World, Animal Farm, Fahrenheit 454. All of those books were in their own ways prophecies, and we seem to be there. I mean, Fahrenheit 454 was book burning, right? We got book burning going on constantly. Either it's actual book burning, ripping out Huckleberry Finn from libraries, or it's via censorship. It's just quite interesting. By the way, I think when I sent you an email, I asked you about a certain book, what was it called? Behind the Veil, or Behind the Curtain, I should say. And have you read that book or know anything about it?
No, I haven't read it. It supposedly details the network of the far left billionaires who fund so much of this noxious activism and violence. People like George Soros, but I haven't read this book.
Well, interestingly enough, I think I mentioned this on the show before. I'd done a little study of the ultra rich in this country, the top 10, 12 ultra rich people in this country, people with multiple billions of dollars worth of assets. Some, like you said, notational, just stock certificates, but virtually all of them are Democrats. I went through one list of 10, and 9 out of 10 were Democrats, including the top four out of the top 5. I think Sheldon Adelson was the only Republican in the top group. But if you ask a typical American who represents the wealthy, who are they going to say? They say the Republicans, which is nonsense. The Democratic Party is totally controlled by the ultra-rich. The wealthiest congressional districts in the country are represented by Democrats. So I don't, this is public. You don't have to take my word for it. Just look it up. There is a lot of information on the internet that is usable. A lot that's nonsense, but you can look up, the Census Bureau analysis of income, of wealth, and what have you, and it's very interesting. But of course, California, it may be the future. It's the wealthy, the affluent, and the wealthy, and their servants. And if you go to rural California, I'm told by people who've been to rural California, it's looking more and more like third world country, with broken down homes, old refrigerators in the front yard, the whole thing. And how long till California collapses? I don't know. But financially, I don't see they can keep going. But we'll see. Obviously, if the Democrats get in power, they will bail out the Democratic states. They'll bail out California. They'll bail out Illinois. They'll bail out New Jersey.
That's going to happen regardless, because it has to happen. The government will spend trillions more bailing out people, but also bailing out the states. There's no alternative, and it doesn't matter which party is in power. So I don't think my vision has to necessarily be pessimistic, because it's also a vision of creating a society, a Christian society, or whatever society you can get enough people for on this continent that can be very positive and get away from the decadence and now extreme decadence and sort of tyranny that we've been having in this country for decades, right? Because we are sliding towards third world economic conditions, just as we're sliding towards the Orwellian political, social, cultural conditions. But it's going to take a fight. It's not going to just happen, but it's going to take real effort, real rethinking. So in that sense, it's very negative. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to be dangerous, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity to create something really great, really wonderful, and that could last for a long time. Not forever. Nothing on this earth lasts forever, but for a long time.
In other words, United States does not have to become Oceania, right?
No, it's a matter of human choice, right? There's no inevitability of an Orwellian state. There's no inevitability of Maoism, or there's no inevitability that we become like the third world. It's a product of human choice, and in particular, conservatives, Christians, and others who don't like the way things are going can choose to get together and do something else and separate from those who don't. I think we need very much to give up on the idea that we're going to somehow convince communists, progressives, and liberals to change. Very few of them are ever going to change. This is the way they are. This is what they believe in. This is what they do. And the solution is to simply have nothing further to do with them. That is the solution. And to live with like-minded people who don't hate you. I mean, that is the solution. And then they can go off and live the way they want to without being interfered with by us.
Well, that sounds like an interesting solution. It may happen. It may very well happen. That's the end of the show. Thank you very much, Joseph. And I still disagree with you about Trump, but I'm signing off.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is